All right, so this is Unit 12 talking about plants. So let's just review the plant kingdom a little bit. Remember that they're eukaryotes, meaning they have a nucleus. They're autotrophic, so they have to get their energy from the sun. And they have a cell wall, and they're multicellular. So their individual cells can't survive on their own. Plants have evolved from algae. So basically what that means is they have an embryo inside a female structure, and algae do not. Algae are just a type of protists that still have that photosynthetic capability. Also, plants are going to have something called a cuticle, which is a waxy layer protecting their leaves and stem, and it helps to prevent water loss. They also have something called a stomata on the underside of their leaves, which are little tiny openings or pores to allow carbon dioxide and oxygen to be swapped during photosynthesis. And then they have vascular tissue. And that vascular tissue helps them transport water and nutrients. So in humans, our vascular tissue is like our blood vessels to help transport blood. And in a plant, it's xylem and phloem. Xylem is for water. They're going to be a little bit thicker, bigger tube. And phloem are a little bit smaller tubes, but meant for sugar. So there's 4 types of plants, what we call non-vascular, also known as a bryophyte, seedless vascular, gymnosperms, and angiosperms. So the non-vascular plants, literally just like it sounds, they do not have a vascular system. They're also not going to have seeds. Seedless vascular, they do have xylem and phloem, but no seeds. And then gymnosperms and angiosperms both use seeds, but the gymnosperms are going to use cones to protect that seed, whereas angiosperms are going to use like a fruit or a flower to kind of protect those seeds. So let's start with the seedless plants. Starting with a bryophyte, just remember there's no vascular system, which means they don't have the ability to transport water and sugar up to like the tips of their leaves. So instead, they actually have to absorb that water directly through the tissue. So they kind of need to sit low to the ground. They also need to be able to then grow in a pretty moist environment if that's how they're absorbing water. So examples of this would be moss, also liverworts and hornworts, which you can kind of see pictured here to the right. Seedless vascular plants do have xylem and phloem now, so they can grow a little bit taller up off the ground. However, they're still not going to use the seed to reproduce. So a good example of this would be like a fern. And both of these plants do sexual or asexual reproduction. So for asexual, they do something called fragmentation. This is where part of the plant can actually be broken off, and it will actually become a whole new plant from that little piece. For sexual reproduction, they're going to use sperm and egg, but they have to use water. So they need a nice big rainstorm to kind of come along and wash the sperm away. And that sperm then is going to swim till it finds an egg, where it'll then fertilize it, and you'll get a whole new plant. So usually on these, you'll see a completely separate male plant making the sperm and a completely separate female plant making the egg. We use seedless plants for a lot of different reasons. They can help us make fossil fuels. We can also use them as a heat source. It's usually what peat moss is used for. And then oftentimes farmers will even use them as fertilizer. So since they are really good at kind of retaining some moisture and things like that, it can kind of help keep the soil pretty healthy. So. All right, and then on to the seed plants. Whole purpose of a seed is to basically allow a new plant to kind of sit dormant for a while until conditions are just right, and then all of a sudden they're going to start to grow. So they have this seed coat, which is a nice protective outer coating. It allows the seed to live through droughts, winters, flooding, and then all of a sudden, like I said, when the conditions are just right, that seedling's going to sprout and they're going to actually feed off of that seed coat. So the only thing is we need animals or wind to kind of help spread our seeds out. So like the picture on the left, these would be like little dandelion tufts. They just need some wind. These heavier, thicker seeds to the right, they would need an animal to kind of, eat them, carry them away, that type of thing. So for wind dispersal of a seed, they have to be built in order for the wind to carry it. So like this little seed up here to the right, it's got almost like wings on it. So the wind catches it, falls off the tree, and it'll kind of float and flutter down to the ground. And hopefully wherever it lands, you'll get a new tree. Dandelions work the same way. Maple seeds again have kind of these wing-like structures on them to help them. Other seeds are encased in a fruit. We basically get an animal to eat the fruit. They then basically carry the seed until the chance when they remove their waste. And so wherever they go to the bathroom, that's where the seed lands, and we'll get a new plant from that. So other plants don't always have fruit. They may use something called a burr, and the burr will just attach to the animal's fur. The animal will kind of carry it until it gets dropped off somewhere, and then again, wherever it lands, that's usually where you'll get a new plant. So gymnosperms literally means naked seed, so there's no fruit helping this one. Instead, their seeds are actually in a cone. So you can kind of see on the picture here, these are cones developing. What happens is the pollen gets dispersed by the wind, fertilizes the egg, which is inside this cone, and then basically that's where it'll grow. And then as the cone falls and hits the ground, it'll pop open and those seeds will kind of disperse all over the place. And this is how conifers work. So pine trees, fir trees, spruce trees, they all deal with cones. Angiosperms, on the other hand, use flowers. So they can self-pollinate, meaning it'll have male and female parts, or they can cross-pollinate. So their pollen will be spread from one plant to the next. They do need then wind or animals to help spread that pollen. Usually they'll use insects. So that's the whole purpose of a flower, is to be bright and colorful to attract a pollinator like a bird or a butterfly who feeds on the nectar. When they're feeding, then they get the pollen all over themselves and they go to the next plant and help pollinate that. So just keep in mind flowers are not always ornate, so they're not always really pretty like the top picture here. Sometimes this is the flower like it is in corn. So not real ornate, but still, you know, hopefully something's feeding on it. And there's two types of angiosperms, a monocot versus a dicot, and we're going to walk through several things that make them different from one another. So we'll start with the seeds. Monocots have something called a cotyledon, which is basically like a food store. And so they just have one of them. So like a corn seed, you literally could not break that in half. It's just one whole piece of corn. For a dicot, there's two cotyledons. So something like a lima bean, we can literally split the seed into two halves pretty nicely. Okay, and that's literally where these names come from. Mono, one, cot, cotyledon. Dicot, di means two, cot, cotyledons, so two food stores. So one versus two. If we look at the vascular bundles, and if we start with the stem, in a monocot, the vascular bundles, the xylem and phloem, are kind of scattered all over the place. In a dicot, the vascular bundles are going to be in a nice ring kind of around the edge of the stem. If we look down into the root, in a monocot now, they're going to be in kind of a ring right in the middle, whereas in a dicot, they're going to make almost like an X in the middle of the root. So just a little bit different, you know, looking at the stem, okay, how they're arranged versus down in the root. So just be careful with those vascular bundles, they do change a little bit. If you look at the leaves on a monocot, these leaf veins run parallel, so kind of up and down, just like it is on a corn leaf. If you look at a dicot, the leaf veins are going to branch off. So this would be like an oak tree. You can kind of see where it branches left and right there. And then for flowers, if you look at a monocot, their flower petals are in multiples of 3, like a lily, and you can literally count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's got 6 petals. That's a multiple of 3. And in a dicot, their petals are going to be in multiples of 4 or 5. So if you look at the geranium, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 petals, so it's a dicot. Now let's say you get a flower with 12 petals. Well, 12 is a multiple of 3 and 4, so how would you tell if it's a monocot or a dicot? You would then maybe have to do something besides counting the petals. You may have to go back and look at the leaf veins, or even, you know, the seeds that it produces, or go even further and look at the xylem and phloem and how it's arranged. So you'd have to look at something else. So here's the chart showing the difference between monocots and dicots. So just make sure that you fill in your chart in your notes. And just be careful here on the vascular bundles. They're a little bit different, stem versus root. And here's some practice. So which one is this, a monocot or a dicot? And if you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it's got 6 petals. That makes it a monocot. Try this one. Again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 petals makes it, this one's a monocot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 petals on this one which makes it a dicot if it's a multiple of 5. This one has branching leaf veins, so that makes it a dicot. And we'll get some more practice with monocots and dicots as we do a couple labs and do a few reviews in class. So this ends the first 3 sections of notes.